Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Lifetime of Riches, the Biography of Napoleon Hill, by Michael J. Ritt, Jr. and Kirk. Narrated by Christopher Grove. Forward. It was my good fortune to be the first employee of the Napoleon Hill Associates. When Dr. Hill and W. Clement Stone formed Napoleon Hill Associates in 1952 to publish and distribute the Positive Mental Attitude PMA Philosophy of Success, I was working for Mr. Stone, managing the Audiovisual Service Department of Combined Insurance Company of America. They asked me to record their lectures and to help with seminars and training programs they planned to offer. For 10 years I traveled the country with these incredible men, recording their lectures, helping in the training sessions, and developing the promotional and teaching materials that they used. It was an experience afforded to very few, one that I shall always cherish. I can imagine nothing finer than to be able to work with such extraordinary people to help positively influence the lives of millions of people around the world. When the Napoleon Hill Foundation was organized to serve as a vehicle to collect Dr. Hill's works and spread his philosophy of personal achievement, his wife, Annie Lou, asked me to serve on the board of directors. It was my privilege to serve as the organization's executive director, a position that I continue to hold today. Over the years, we've republished a number of Dr. Hill's books, and we have published totally new works based on his lectures, seminars, training guides, and other archival material. All have been enthusiastically received by the thousands upon thousands of loyal followers who have seen their lives change for the better when they understood and applied the principles of success Dr. Hill spent his lifetime developing and writing about. He was an inspirational speaker who motivated millions of people to take charge of their own lives, to create for themselves the future that they desired. Although I heard him speak countless times as we traversed the country, spreading his message, I never failed to learn something new and to be inspired every time he spoke. Assembling the information for this biography provided me with the opportunity to relive many of those grand moments and to rededicate myself to the perpetuation of the philosophy developed by this unique individual. It also allowed me to spend some time with Dr. Hill's son David, who was enormously helpful in ensuring the historical accuracy of this work. Napoleon Hill was and is an American treasure. He was a confidant of presidents and statesmen. The prominent men of several generations freely revealed their secrets of success to him, but he never forgot his humble origins. He considered it his sacred obligation to share with the world the knowledge about personal achievement that he had accumulated during his rich and varied life. I shall be eternally grateful that I was privileged to know well this great man, and I hope that through the chapters of this biography you, too, can come to know the man who helped millions of ordinary people discover the greatness within themselves. Michael J. Ritt, Jr. Introduction. I had experienced firsthand the power of Napoleon Hill's ideas long before I met the man himself. It was 1937, and although I had been in business for 15 years, I, like most other American businessmen, was struggling to recover from the Great Depression. Then something happened that changed my life forever. I remember it as clearly today as if it were yesterday. Morris Picus, a well-known sales executive and sales counselor, had called upon me trying to sell me on a book that he was promoting to sales organizations. I didn't like the book and didn't buy, but as he was leaving, Mr. Picus gave me a copy of another book by a little-known author named Napoleon Hill. The book was titled Think and Grow Rich. Hill's message was electrifying. As I turned the pages of this great book, I realized that I held in my hand the collective wisdom of the great achievers of the day. The principles that they used to achieve success was available to anyone. They could be adopted and applied by any individual who would take the time to study and understand them. When I read Think and Grow Rich, I realized that Hill's philosophy absolutely coincided with my own. His was a message of hope supported by proven, actionable principles. He knew that what the mind could conceive and believe, the mind could achieve when the principles were tenaciously applied by those who have a positive mental attitude. I was particularly interested in what Hill called the master-mind alliance. Two or more people working together in perfect harmony toward the achievement of a common objective. I realized that through the application of this principle, I could leverage myself by aligning my interests with those of others. They could help me with the work I had been doing, freeing me for other activities. I began by sending a copy of Think and Grow Rich to each of my sales representatives. The results were instantaneous and awesome. Those who were willing to recognize, relate, assimilate, and apply the principles were inspired by the book's contents and became highly motivated to achieve personal and financial success. My sales managers became builders of miracle salespeople. Their sales results were phenomenal. They achieved what those unfamiliar with the art of motivation believed was simply impossible. They accomplished astounding sales records, then promptly broke those records. I knew at the time that Napoleon Hill was destined for greatness. Big things began to happen for me as a result of the success my sales representatives achieved. I went from struggling for simple survival to building an organization that numbered more than 1,000 salespersons. My bills were paid, my investments and assets were increasing, and I bought a vacation home in Florida. I realized that the only limitations I would ever have would be those that I placed upon myself. It was 15 years before I met the author whose work changed my life, and it occurred in a totally unexpected way. I had been asked to speak at a meeting of the suburban Chicago North Shore Kiwanis Club. What I didn't know, when I cheerfully accepted that invitation, was that Napoleon Hill would be at the same meeting. In truth, I didn't even know where Dr. Hill lived or if he was still around. I discovered that at age 69, he was very much alive and contributing, although he had slowed down a good deal in his later years. We very quickly discovered that our philosophies were still as compatible as they were when I first sent a copy of his book to my sales representatives. Before the luncheon was over, I asked Dr. Hill to come out of retirement to continue to spread his powerful message of personal achievement. Despite the sacrifices he knew he would be required to make, he didn't hesitate. He said, "I will, if you will be my general manager." Another trait we share is that we are both men of action. Before the luncheon was over, we had made a deal. During the decade we worked together, we had the opportunity to speak to thousands and thousands of people about the principles of personal achievement. I know that we successfully motivated many of them to realize their potential to achieve any goal that they set for themselves, as long as it doesn't violate the laws of God or the rights of their fellow men. I know this to be true because more than 3 decades later I still hear from them how this philosophy changed their lives for the better. It has been my honor to serve as president of the Napoleon Hill Foundation and to play an active role in the perpetuation of this wonderfully practical philosophy of personal achievement. I shall always be indebted to Napoleon Hill for the profound influence he has had upon my life. Dr. Hill passed away in 1970 at the age of 87, but his ideas will never die. They are as powerful today as they were when he first introduced them so many years ago. One of the great joys of my life has been watching each new generation discover for itself the great truths contained in Hill's writings. His is a philosophy that is destined to endure. It can be said about Napoleon Hill that he achieved one of the world's noblest distinctions. He made our world a better world for this and future generations as a result of his having been a part of it. I know you will enjoy the story of his life, and I'm equally confident that you will receive an enormous benefit from the principles of success that he wrote about, if you will only apply them in your own life. I wish you great success. W. Clement Stone. Chapter 1. 1883 to 1895. Napoleon Hill struggled into a turbulent, changing world on October 26, 1883, the firstborn child of Sarah and James Hill of Wise County, Virginia. It was a strange and difficult time to begin a life. In the West, the United States was playing out the last acts of her manifest destiny. Indian fighter George Armstrong Custer was just 7 years dead. His conqueror, Sitting Bull, had even more recently been exiled to a reservation. Geronimo and other Apache chiefs were still fighting to maintain their freedom in the American Southwest, their hit-and-run guerrilla tactics extending the Indian Wars for a few more years. But even as America was solidifying her western expansion, the nation's focus was returning east, where power had passed from old money and landed gentry to a new generation of capitalist tycoons bent on carving empires for themselves in manufacturing and commerce. By the time of Napoleon Hill's birth, America's factories and sweatshops were roiling with labor tensions that would reach a violent climax in the Haymarket Square riot of 1886, the first of many such violent confrontations that would take place during Hill's life. But the 1880s and 1890s were also a period when the American dream would blossom brighter and more visibly than ever before, inspired by a steady procession of common men rising to positions of power and wealth. Among the most famous was Thomas Edison, whose stature and wealth as an inventor was firmly established by the time Hill was born. Indeed, just a few months before Hill's birth, Edison's light bulbs illuminated a field in Fort Wayne, Indiana, for the playing of America's first night baseball game. Another famous example was Andrew Carnegie, a self-made millionaire immigrant who had gambled his hard-fought wealth on an infant company in fledgling industry in 1873. When Hill was born 10 years later, the Carnegie Steel Company had already emerged as one of the world's premier steel producers, and Andrew Carnegie was well on his way to converting mere wealth into one of the most colossal fortunes ever amassed by an individual. Like millions of other Americans born into modest or impoverished means, Hill was destined to admire the likes of Edison, Carnegie, Henry Ford, and dozens of other self-made men with a passion that bordered on worship. Like millions of other Americans, he would become consumed with interest about people who succeeded where others fail, why and how to structure his own life to take a place among the rich and powerful. Like millions of Americans, he would dream of meeting these giants, impressing them, and harvesting the wisdom that produced their incredible accomplishments. But unlike most of those other millions of admirers and wanderers, Napoleon Hill was destined to fulfill his dreams. He would not only meet and impress America's greatest achievers, dozens of them, he would also spend his entire adult life eliciting their secrets to success and communicating them to the world. Wise County was a forgotten backwater region on the Kentucky border in the Blue Ridge Mountains. It was almost completely isolated from the frenetic changes taking place in America's cities and towns. To reach it from the outside world, one had to navigate more than 100 miles through thick forests, deep valleys and gorges, and remote hollows. The roads ranged from rutted dirt tracks to rock-bottom creek beds that could only be used between rains. Life was primitive by the standards of eastern city dwellers. 1- and 2-room log cabins were the typical dwellings of the Wise County populace in the 1880s, and some lived in shelters simply carved out of the fallen trunks of huge trees. Life expectancies were short, infant mortality high, and tens of thousands of rural Virginians suffered from chronic health problems ranging from hookworm to malaria to pellagra, a disease caused by inadequate diet. Except in a few major towns, public schools were in wretched shape throughout the state. Elementary schools were open for only about 4 months of the year, and attendance was not required. High schools were rare, numbering fewer than 100 in the entire state, and most offered only a 2- or 3-year curriculum. Indeed, even 20 years after Hill's birth, there were just 10 4-year high schools in all of Virginia. Barter was more common than cash in Wise County, and there were few well-to-do families. Many heated their homes by burning coal, lumps of which lay on the ground for the taking. Commercial coal mining did not begin until the end of the decade, and would finally come to southwest Virginia in the 1890s. Most made a living by combining farming with a trade and hunting for fresh meat. The thin, rocky soil and the rugged contours of the land made farming difficult in the best of times. But the 1880s were not the best of times in American agriculture. Depressed crop prices were driving a steady stream of families out of farming and into the cities in desperate search of a living wage. In Wise County and the rest of Appalachia, those who stayed often survived by converting their meager corn crops into something more valuable: moonshine. And although they most often lived in close-knit cooperation with one another, violent feuds and quarrels could spark suddenly and last for years. Indeed, just 2 or 3 days' ride from Wise County, the most infamous mountain feud of all, between the Hatfields and the McCoys, started shortly before Napoleon's birth and would glow and flare for nearly 2 decades. No wonder, then, that Napoleon Hill would later describe his birthplace as a 2-room log cabin in a mountain culture famous for 3 things: feuds, moonshine, and ignorant people. For 3 generations, my people had been born, lived, struggled in ignorance, illiteracy, and poverty, and died without having been outside the mountains of that section, wrote Hill in his unpublished autobiography. They made their living from the soil. Whatever money they procured was from the sale of corn converted into moonshine. There were no railroads, telephones, electric lights, or passable public highways. Hill alluded often to his early childhood in his articles, books, and speeches. His recollections of those early years, shallow and entirely negative, helped lend dramatic proportions to his self-told, rags-to-riches story. In another way, they reflected the feelings of a man who, even as a child, stood somewhat outside the circle of mountain culture. James Monroe Hill, Napoleon's father, was neither ignorant nor illiterate, and it is unlikely he engaged in moonshining. He was one of 6 children of James Madison Hill, an English-born printer who immigrated to America in the 1840s with 2 brothers and settled in the Black Mountain area of the Kentucky-Virginia border. James Monroe Hill took to mountain living in a way Napoleon never would. Like his neighbors, James Hill combined farming with other trades and services in demand in their isolated community. As a boy, he learned the printing trade from his father, as well as hunting and fishing and nature lore. He received a brief, crude public school education in a 1-room log schoolhouse. At age 14, his formal education was complete, and he began working in his father's printing business. By the time he was 17 years old, James had married Sarah Sylvania Blair and built a cabin in a remote area on Guest River that later became a hamlet called Lips. That year, he made his own printing press using a salvaged font of old type and a wooden press and chase he carved and chiseled from local timber. James used the press to publish the Zephyr, Wise County's first newspaper. It contained personals, local news, a brief mention about the weather, and a short editorial. In addition to printing and writing the copy, the young entrepreneur personally delivered the publication by horseback to its 100 or so subscribers. Publishing the Zephyr was a labor of love for James Hill. It produced little income and required a great deal of time. Thus, 3 years later, when his first son was born, he suspended publication to put all his energies into providing for his young family. He had no difficulty finding other, more marketable pursuits for his talents. When Napoleon was born, James was a blacksmith and farmer. Later, he put lips on the map by helping to establish a post office there, and he served as postmaster for many years. He was also a trader and merchant, and ran a small general store. He did all these things well. In the mountain tradition, he was largely self-taught, substituting creativity and cleverness for formal training. His inspiration was the need to find solutions to his own and his neighbors' problems. Sarah and James named their first son Oliver Napoleon, the middle name coming from an uncle of James's who had immigrated with his father from England and, according to family accounts, made a success of himself. Perhaps in the hope that their eldest son would also make good, the family called him Napoleon, and eventually dropped Oliver from his name altogether. Napoleon's earliest years marked him for anything but success, however. He was a wild, perhaps hyperactive child known to neighbors and family members mainly for the mischief he caused. One of his favorite pastimes was rolling rocks down a hill. On one particular day, a large rock he pitched dislodged a boulder that smashed through several fences and very nearly struck a neighbor's house before rolling to a stop nearby. By Hill's own account, his parents started him in school at age 4, mainly to get me off their hands while they worked in the fields. Part of Napoleon's wildness may have stemmed from his mother's frail health. Little is known about Sarah Hill, save that she bore Napoleon and his brother Vivian prior to dying, when Napoleon was 9 years old. By then, Napoleon considered himself the toughest boy in the county and posed a serious disciplinary problem for his father. Stunned and lonely after his mother's death, Napoleon's penchant for pranks and mischief took a more foreboding direction. In a region where it was common, even for young boys, to hunt with rifles, Napoleon found a way to get everyone's attention. He began toting a real pistol, a 6-shooter, and imagined himself in the role of his hero, Jesse James. A year later, when his father remarried, Napoleon's growing marksmanship and wildness had made him the terror of Guest River, and the subject of endless consternation to both James Hill and other members of the Hill clan who had tried fruitlessly to turn the boy around. The Hill family's concern about young Napoleon's direction in life was well-founded. While most of the people who settled in the Virginia-Kentucky border area in the 1880s and 1890s were industrious, resourceful, God-fearing families, the remote mountain wilderness had more than its share of lawless thugs who rode the backwoods trails packing pistols and knives that were used for robbery and murder. If young Napoleon were to reach adolescence still wanting to be an outlaw, he could find role models and opportunities almost literally in his own backyard. Just as Napoleon's reputation for trouble was reaching its peak, a remarkable woman entered his life. A year after Sarah's death, James Hill married Martha Ramey Banner, the widow of a school principal and daughter of a Coburn, Virginia physician. Nothing in her cultured upbringing prepared her for mountain living. But nothing, not even a pistol-toting 10-year-old stepson, could defeat her. A well-educated, dynamic woman, Martha saw in James Hill a kind, decent man with a raw genius for tinkering and inventing things. In her eldest stepson, the scourge of the county, she saw a restless, angry boy drifting towards self-destruction. In the Hill homestead, she saw poverty and a lack of direction that threatened the Hill children with a lifetime of ignorance, backbreaking labor, and failure. A lesser woman would almost certainly have waited for a less challenging situation, but Martha stepped in decisively. Soon after the marriage, Martha Hill gathered her 3 children and the Hills together and announced that she intended to change the mental, spiritual, and financial status of the entire family. Several things happened very quickly after that. James Hill established the Lips Post Office and began selling general merchandise. At Martha's insistence, the entire family became active in the Three Forks of Powell River Primitive Baptist Church, and Martha Hill made Napoleon her pet project. The church undoubtedly helped Martha curb Napoleon's antisocial behavior. It not only provided religious training and worship, but was also a primary thread in the area's social fabric. After several fiery sermons, the congregation would open its doors to hear and rule on charges of misconduct raised by one member against another. Penalties for the unrepentant could include banishment from the church and its social activities, as well as being shunned by church members outside the church. Though there is no record of it, Napoleon almost certainly was the focus of some of the open-door sessions. To avoid humiliation for himself and his family, he would have had to acknowledge his trespasses and pledge to do better in the future. But Martha's work with Napoleon went far beyond the church and social pressure. She patiently constructed a close individual relationship with her troubled stepson. She didn't force the stubborn, hot-tempered boy to do things, for this would most certainly have produced failure. Instead, she treated him like the person she wanted him to become, an intelligent, hard-working, independent lad who would set constructive goals for himself and achieve them. Her patience and respect paid off. When Napoleon was 11 years old, Martha called him into the living room for a private conversation. "People are wrong about you, Napoleon," she said. "You are not the worst boy in the county, only the most active. You just need to direct your energy toward accomplishing something worthwhile." In the course of this conversation, Martha suggested that Napoleon consider becoming a writer because of his keen imagination and gutsy initiative. "If you will devote as much time to reading and writing as you have to causing trouble," she concluded, "you might live to see time when your influence will be felt throughout the state." Martha's vision was a revelation to young Napoleon. It was the first time anyone other than James or Sarah had seen something good in him, and it was the first time he had ever considered winning fame beyond the borders of rural Wise County. Though he continued to practice with his six-shooter, he also attacked his education with unprecedented vigor, even at home, where Martha provided instruction far surpassing the rudimentary lessons available at school. Like so many things in Napoleon's life, education did not come easily to him. Discipline and concentration were brutally difficult barriers, but with Martha's help, he struggled gamely against his own nature and gradually began to succeed. By the time Napoleon was 12 years old, Martha could see he was ready for the next step. Pulling him aside once more for a private talk, she proposed that if he would give up his six-gun, she would replace it with a typewriter, a rare and expensive device, in 1895. "If you become as good with a typewriter as you are with that gun," said Martha, "you may become rich and famous and known throughout the world." Napoleon was powerless to resist this temptation. Even at age 12, he lusted for fame and fortune. His diligent reading had acquainted him with great books and great writers, and he had learned that writers can achieve fame that spreads beyond mere county, state, or national boundaries, and even beyond one's own lifetime. Now, in one sweeping proposal, Martha gave Napoleon the chance to picture himself in that image. Later in life, Napoleon Hill would popularize the phrase, "What the mind of a man can conceive, it can achieve." And so it was with young Napoleon. The seed of a concept carefully planted and patiently nurtured by his stepmother began to take root and grow. Without hesitation, Napoleon surrendered his pistol to Martha and agreed to her proposal. As he did so, his life as an unruly backwoods tough came to an end with utter finality, and he cracked open the first door to his future, a future that lay far from the Blue Ridge Mountains, moonshine, and the struggle to scratch out a living from the soil. Probably no one was more surprised than James Hill at the transformation that occurred in his adolescent son. Though he had watched with amazement for several years as the magic Martha worked on Napoleon, nothing prepared him for the sight of his once feared son waiting with ecstatic anticipation for the arrival of his new typewriter. A weapon.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?